Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by a writer, producer, and journalist who has covered the film industry as commerce rather than gossip for the Boston Herald, but has also variously been a studio publicist, college teacher, and broadcaster. That's right, it's your favorite writer, producer, journalist, and mine, Nat Segaloff. Nat, did I pronounce that correctly? I forgot to ask you before we started.
Close enough for government work. You're fine, Robert.
How is
Thank you.
it? How is it supposed to be pronounced? I apologize.
Segaloff, as if it's S-A instead of S-E.
Segaloff. I
I
always
tell them
mean to
in.
ask everybody before we go live, and then it's once we're live. And but anyway, all right. Well, anyway, how? Thank you so much for making time. As I was mentioning to you in the green room, you had sent over your biography, which it's like 10 pages long. It's not really 10 pages long, but you have a very extensive career. You have done a lot. I don't even know if we are going to be able to, brush the surface of everything that you've done, but we do want to, discuss some of the highlights. Um, you and I had started, I guess, corresponding because David Morrell, I had interviewed David Morrell about his most recent, well, it's not really his book, but it's your book about obviously his like greatest creation, Rambo, and you had
Right.
done a book about that, and you've done a lot of different books about different people in the film industry, different writers, directors, everything else that we're going to get into. I, I guess my main question to start off with, because usually, like either I'm chatting with authors who wrote a novel or like a narrator or something like that. You have so many different hats that you've worn over the years. I guess as a little boy, what was the initial dream? What did you want to do? Like what was the initial plan?
Like everybody who was raised in the 50s, I wanted to be a movie director, but there was no such thing in those days because you had to be either somebody's son or you had to just get very lucky. But the shaping experience in my life as far as movies, always loving them, of course, was in fourth grade. They asked for a show of hands of who wants to learn to run the movie projector. And I raised my hand, and there were four of us, and they chose the first three. So I realized at that point I'd have to do it on my own from then on, and I've pretty much done that with the help of a lot of different people. But I've never been someone who's been lucky. I've always had to work at things and then gotten lucky because luck is just the result of work.
And then from there, I'm assuming you went to college. What was your major?
I went to college and I majored in film or broadcasting in film, which was something they were doing then. They were selling degrees really because there was no assurance of ever getting into the film industry. The other reason to go to college, of course, was Vietnam, and you got a 2S deferment if you were a full-time student. So after I took care of the whole draft business, I went to work writing for a publicity company for American International Pictures, the people who gave you the beach blanket movies. They made me because I had a college degree, and it was because I had a college degree, the group sales director for a version of Julius Caesar, starring Charlton Heston, that AIP had acquired, probably in a garage sale somewhere. It was their first high-class film, and please forgive me, Eastern Massachusetts, where I was stationed. I had every high school student in Eastern Massachusetts on school buses with group sales tickets to see the worst film of Julius Caesar you've ever heard of in your life. So I have that to live down to this day. And just to bronze it, the next year they did the same thing with a version of Wuthering Heights, which was actually pretty good. I got them all back into the theater to see Wuthering Heights. So that was my American International Pictures experience. And I went on to work for small agencies representing Paramount and Columbia and MGM and various people for the next couple of years. I was hired by the major theater chain in Massachusetts and wound up schlepping all the celebrities around town because in those days they would tour the stars and directors through to the various newspapers and TV and radio stations and colleges. And from that point, I was hired by the studios and then I was fired by the studios. And then I went back to Boston, became a newspaperman. And after I got blacklisted there, I decided to write books. The
Well,
end.
so let's go back to, I guess, like more around the studio time when all this was happening. What year was this again?
This is the middle 70s, the last great time in American filmmaking. And so I had a
Yeah,
chance.
kind of
Oh, my,
tell us, kind of help
wonderful.
us, kind of position ourselves. Like what were the big movies that like around that time? Who were the big directors? Who were the big actors that would really stick out for people? Because I mean, God, 70s
Mhm.
now. I mean, it feels like even
Yeah.
like 20 years ago has been a long time. So, but at
50 years
least for
ago.
me
And
as a
think
child,
about
and
it.
yeah, I mean, I grew up like I guess what I was born in the 80s. So like for me, you know. There was that time I think like in 1999 was when you had like The Matrix and American Beauty and Fight Club and like all these so you really had an idea of like the different actors like so for the 70s when you were like what were those movies at the time?
Well, these were the movies, and I also represented the directors at various times. People like Robert Altman and William Friedkin and Paul Mazursky and Mark Rydell. People I've actually written about. James Bridges, uh, Norman Jewis, and I had a little bit to do with. These were the major directors of that era. I had lunch with Martin Scorsese once, but I didn't represent him. But William Friedkin turned out to be the one who was the most riveting for me and became the closest at that point, to the point where when I decided I was going to go into the book writing business, I called up Billy, because everybody called him Billy, and asked if I could write his biography. And he said yes. That was it. I mean, that was the honor of the man. But I got to know all kinds of people, maybe a couple of hundred. And I have one good story for each of them. You see, when I was with somebody, whether it was Paul Winfield or Paul Newman or Michael Caine or anybody, I kept a journal and I wrote down one sentence that to me would conjure up the entire couple of days we had spent together. And so years later, when I decided to write a memoir, and I figured since I wasn't famous, I'd write my memoir about other people. I was able to tell all of these stories about the famous people and the experiences I'd had with them. And that really solidified it in my mind so that I'm a good after dinner speaker and I do the proper citations. And it was 5 years of publicity, a job I hated, but a career that was fun. And I finally got out of it.
Yeah. Well, you said that you went back to Boston as a journalist. I didn't know if you were being cheeky when you said you got blacklisted. Is that a thing that you can discuss?
Oh, sure. Linda Ellerby said, never trust a reporter who hasn't been fired at least once. Well, I was working at United Artists and I was caught in a kind of a union squeeze between East and West Coast publicists guilds. And they decided to fire me just before the Christmas party. So I hung around and had a great time. And of course, the great thing, First United Artists was a loony bin, but lots of fun. And I really loved the people there. It was a simple union thing, not anything personal. So years later, when I was a critic and I had to deal with the same people at United Artists who'd fired me, I enjoyed making them thoroughly uncomfortable, even though there was no reason for them to be. I became a newspaper writer in Boston, and as you said, I covered the business end, not the gossip end, because my background in exhibition and in distribution and in publicity allowed me to see where the real stories were. Because at the time, Boston was the location of four major theater chains: Lowe's Theaters, USA Cinemas, General Cinemas, Hoyt's, and it was just a real, and of course, Sumner Redstone's National Amusement. So it was a hotbed of business swapping and selling. And I was the only person on any of the newspapers or TV stations in Boston who knew what was going on because I knew all the executives from all the companies. And I started writing stories. And at one point, I pissed off the largest advertiser in town who called the publisher and said, "Don't run that stuff anymore." It was that simple. I was a freelancer and I decided to move out to California.
This is a little bit of an aside, but since you've worked in the business as you have, has there been a movie or even a TV show that really best represents how the film industry works back in the 70s and 80s?
Hmm.
I mean, because obviously there's a lot of
Yeah.
movies out there, there's a lot of TV shows, but usually they might get a little whitewashed or they maybe don't get it. I mean, of course there's the more recent
Oh
the
yeah.
Seth
The
Rogen, the studio, which
yeah.
is more, but I mean that's more just satire. But like I didn't know if there's anything that really if you watch it you're like, okay, this is pretty much dead
Yeah.
on how things
Yeah.
were.
There's one, and it's one that nobody's heard about. It's called Action. Stars Jay Moore and Ileana Douglas, and it was done for one daring season on Fox
Hmm.
as a kind of a deal between the people at Fox, not Fox News, but Fox Programming. Action is about a director, or rather a producer named Peter Dragon, played by Jay Moore, who has a flop and he has to make a hit or he's out of the business. And it has lots of cameos from film people. It is profane, it is sexy, it is disgusting, it is lewd, it is accurate. And if you can find it anywhere, I know it's not streaming because Disney owns it now. You'll never see it. But if you can find a used DVD, believe me, Action in 13 episodes says more about the film business than all the books.
Awesome. I'll have to check it out to try to track that down. So, all right. Well, let's talk about your first book. So, Billy Hurricane: The Stormy Life and Films of William Friedkin. So, at what point did you decide? Because I imagine I mean, for me, I'm just like a fiction writer, I just make stuff up. When you're writing a biography, like as a journalist, I'm sure like it's a lot of work because you want to make sure everything is, I mean, do you hire a fact checker? Is it through the publisher? I mean, how does that even come into things? And when you're working with William, or you said like everyone will call him
Let's call him
Billy.
Bill. Yeah,
How like does he
I know where
get
do you start.
like I mean, is it one of those things where this is an authorized biography? Does he get, final cut on that? Does he read the final draft and say, I want this in, I doesn't want, like how much give and take then is it between you and the person that you're writing about, to make sure, because I imagine, especially as the author, you want to, I don't know, like, kind of set yourself apart. You want to have a little bit of a distance. I mean, how does that work? And has that changed over the course of several different
Okay.
books that you've done?
Well, I'm going to start by letting Louis the Wonder Dog out of the bedroom because he
Yeah,
seemed to
go
be
for
quiet.
it.
Come on, Louis.
And when
Go
we,
on,
and
go to the
we'll definitely
couches.
talk about Louis
I'm
in a
sorry.
bit.
There he is. He's kept me alive. Anyway, if he has to go out, he's in trouble. Uh, with Billy Friedkin, I had known him since 1973 because as a publicist for the movie theater chain, I was the person who handled The Exorcist for that engagement. And I'm happy to report that my fellow executives and I were indicted by the state of Massachusetts for obscenity, uh, blasphemy, and corrupting the morals of a minor because we showed The Exorcist. A crazy religious woman had brought her underage daughter to see the movie, and she held us responsible when, in fact, she should have been arrested for child abuse. Well, the case was thrown out of court on the first day of Lent, which lended a certain kind of rejection to it. And in the meantime, Billy had called up with his support, and he and I spoke at some length. When we finally got a chance to get together, it began a friendship that lasted 50 years through thick because he was very, very successful with the French Connection, The Exorcist, and of course later Sorcerer fell apart. And when I decided to start writing books in 1988, I was talking with a journalist friend whose name is Deke Rossell, who was a major Boston critic who had a library of film that would have rivaled that of the Library of Alexandria if they'd had a film section. And we said, well, who hasn't had a book written about them? And we looked and looked and we said, William Friedkin hasn't. But he was alive at the time and still working, and there weren't very many biographies written about people who were in the middles of their careers. Nevertheless, I was lucky to get an agent. I mean, it was that simple, I'm afraid. And I called up Billy at the office one day and said, would you mind very much if I wrote your biography? He said, sure, go ahead. That was it. No handshake, nothing in writing, just his sense of honor and my knowing him. So I went over some of the interviews I'd done with him when I was doing publicity and then when I was a reporter for the Herald and for other newspapers. And then every time I was in LA, I would call and we'd get together for lunch and talk. We talk on the phone now and then. I worked my way through. I visited Chicago where he was born. I went to his school, his place of residence, went through the yearbooks, went to the Hall of Records and found out how old he was. And he had been fibbing about his age for a long time. And I outed him when I showed that he was actually older than he had said he was. And he didn't have any control over the book, but he was very helpful in getting it written. And I'll never know to this day why he let me do it, except he trusted me, which to me is a good enough reason. But what you do with somebody when you're writing a biography is you first must create a timeline. It's like having a big calendar book and you have all the years. And whenever you find a new piece of information, you put it exactly where the information occurs, like a large jigsaw puzzle without any picture on the cover to tell you what you're supposed to see. And eventually, you have enough information to fill in the blanks. And if you don't have enough information to fill in the blanks, you ask the person. Because I prefer to write really profiles, working biographies of people. I've only done, I've never done one of a dead person, not intentionally. So it's just a matter of finding information and sticking it where it belongs, calling up people, getting them to speak. With Billy, it was difficult. Jesus Christ. This is one of those days.
It's okay.
Hold it.
It's all right.
And I'm trying to turn off the phone now. You can't turn off these phones. I'll just throw it across the room. Um, it was, I forgot. I derailed myself. Oh, yes. Uh, in the middle of everything, the Twilight Zone tragedy happened. And at that point, from that point on, nobody on any film crew would speak to me about what happened. Now, I wasn't doing the Twilight Zone. I was doing Billy's films, and he's never had an accident on his set. But even so, the paranoia in Los Angeles was such that no journalist could get any straight answer from anybody working below the line on a film crew.
Hey, can
So
you
I
just
had to
explain
wrap
real
up.
quick what the Twilight Zone tragedy is?
While shooting a segment from the Twilight Zone movie, which was directed by John Landis, uh, Vic Morrow, Micah Chen, and Renee Chen and Micah Lee, who were two Asian children, were killed when a helicopter fell upon them when there were too many pyrotechnics going off for a battle scene recreating Vietnam. The movie was still released and it didn't really do that well. But in the meantime, Landis and the producer and the people who were responsible for it were brought into court on charges of malfeasance, among other things. Eventually, it was settled, but the fallout was so great about danger to performers and others on film sets that all kinds of restrictions were put in and all kinds of fallout happened, especially to those of us in the journalistic community who were trying to cover movies. When you're writing about a movie, the actors are the least interesting people, although they're the ones the editors want. The ones you get the information from are the grips, the electricians, the prop people, the ones who actually do the work. They have all the great stories. No one ever talks to them, but I try to.
Yeah. Um,
Where will we be going with this?
well, let
How
me
it's
let me
done
jump
is
back a
plug
little bit.
away.
So you had worked on The Exorcist at that time. I mean, I'm assuming the film and TV industry is very much like kind of the book industry in that no one really knows anything. It's a lot of just we're going to put something out there. Hopefully, it catches on. Even something stuff can be great. And I want to touch base on Sorcerer because Sorcerer is a movie that I feel at the time, obviously, it's considered a flop and whatever else. But now people watch it and they consider it a masterpiece. And it's just one of those
Yeah.
things that sometimes over time, it's just, things are develop or maybe something is huge at the time. And then over time, no one even thinks about it anymore, or even discusses it. So with The Exorcist, obviously it was a huge book. But was there a sense at the time that this was going to be a big deal? Or was it kind of
Yeah.
like, we hope it's going to be a big deal? It's kind of unclear. I mean, like there's concerns. Again, you're going to have a lot of especially very conservative religious viewers out there who are going to be very upset about certain things.
Well, not to make myself grander than I probably do anyway, I had a tiny, tiny part in the whole
Sure.
phenomenon of The Exorcist. I was just the publicist for the Boston theater that was showing it, and it got a bit out of hand. There were only 26 theaters that showed the movie when it first opened. That was partly because Warner Brothers in those days liked to let a film build, also because they literally finished it hours before, and they couldn't make enough prints to satisfy all the bookings. Of course, it exploded later on. The best-selling nature of the book, of course, is what everybody knew was going to be transferred to the movie, and the movie did, in fact, open humongous. So big, in fact, that in the Twin Theater where I was working in Boston, The Sting was showing on the other screen, and Universal was really angry because all the lines to get into The Exorcist were blocking the ticket buyers for The Sting, and the picture didn't do as well there as they'd hoped. But it took off, and it went all over the place. There was not so much response from the religious community at that point. There were some of the usual pickets, but they really didn't realize that The Exorcist is a pro-Catholic film. It's a
Mhm.
film about the miracle of faith, the mystery of faith, and it holds very much to the Catholic tenets. And people who've looked at it with an open mind since then have come to realize that William Peter Blatty, who was a Jesuit scholar, wasn't fooling around when he wrote a book which said, very simply, if there's a devil, there must be a personified God and the existence of angels. And that's what the movie was about, and that's what Billy directed. People think it's a horror movie, but it isn't. It's a film about the mystery of faith.
Yeah. And then just real quick, maybe you might have some insight in this. In terms of Sorcerer, I don't want to spend a lot of time on Sorcerer, but like, Why did they call it? I mean, obviously it was a remake of Wages of War. Like, was it because they just didn't want to have the same title? Because I guess there there's a theory that it didn't do well because of the title. That like the title did not help the movie.
I don't have a clue. It's the dumbest thing that's ever been done for a movie like Sorcerer. It was the name of a truck, and you see it in one shot.
Yeah,
I don't know why they did that. It might have been that, Billy had made two smash hits in a row. He probably thought the monsoons wouldn't come for him, and he could name his film whatever he wanted. I don't know. The Wages of Fear they couldn't use because of droit morale with the rights that were held by the creators in France.
yeah.
They could have done something else. They could have called it, Four Guys, Two Trucks, as far as I know. But they didn't do it. There was no testing. There was no preview. It just came out the way Billy cut it. And it
Yeah.
took people, what, 30, 40 years to realize it's one of the greatest movies ever made.
So he had Final Cut on that. When did he? Was it from The Exorcist? Did he have Final Cut in The Exorcist, or was it the success of The Exorcist where he became one of those directors who could basically get the final cut?
The immense success of the French Connection gave Billy final cut
Mhm.
on The Exorcist. But in fact, he had the consultancy of people at Warner Brothers who looked at it and said, this scene is redundant. This scene should go. And in fact, when they cut out a couple of scenes from The Exorcist, it created a rift between Billy and William Peter Blatty that wasn't settled for years until Billy put the footage back in. I won't go into the details. It's in the special features if you buy the DVDs. But The Exorcist finally emerged the way Billy wanted it. Some of us think it may be too wordy. But when he went into Sorcerer, it was done by two studios, Universal and Paramount. And the deal was that nobody could even see the rushes. And in fact, when Billy heard that people at Universal were secretly screening the rushes when they came back from the lab before they were sent to the Dominican Republic, he would start shooting some of the slates. Where you do the clapstick before you say action. He would have one of the locals who was learning phonetic English saying, "Mr. Wasserman, you no good," or "Mr. Wasserman, more per diem." Lou Wasserman was the head of Universal. And of course, none of the executives could complain that they were having the rag taken out of them because they weren't supposed to be looking at the rushes. That was Billy's sense of humor.
So from day one, when you first spoke to him, said, can I write this, to when you completed the manuscript, how long did that process take? Do you remember?
Year, I had to cut it off early because, again, all the sources were closed to me. But I had enough that my editor at William Morrow Company, Pam Altschul, who is now Pam Liftlander, was able to work with me, and we put it into shape. Um, I'm happy to say that, after writing hundreds of articles for radio, TV, and newspapers, the first draft was pretty solid, and they didn't have to do a whole lot, although the lawyers did take out a couple of things. But it went right away into print. I mean, I was very lucky. The long process of getting a book done in those days, it took about 10 or 12 months. Uh,
And
and
what
it
year
was
did that come out?
it came out in the beginning of 1990. I turned the draft in early 1989, I think, and it took that long to be physically produced. That's what they did in those days. In fact, I even wrote it on an old steam-powered typewriter. Didn't even have a computer then.
Wow. So did you, and then from that, obviously you've written several other books, but at what point did you start having an idea of what you wanted to do next? Or like how like a lot of these different books, when they were the ideas that initially sprung from you, or were they pitched to you by somebody else? I mean, and then of course we will get to the Morel Rambo book, but
Yeah.
like how did a lot of these projects come about for you?
I just got lucky. I didn't know I wanted to write books full time. I was still writing columns for the newspapers, and I was producing some TV and radio stuff. I mean, it was when you're a freelancer, you have to take whenever the work comes up. It turned out that Pamela Liftlander had left Morrow and she went to a company called Longmeadow Press, which was somehow involved with Walden Books. And she called me one day and said, "Listen, we have a hole in the fall schedule. How fast can you get us a book?" How does that happen? So I worked with a writing partner named Daniel Kimmel, who has written a number of books too, mostly in the science fiction genre. And we spitballed about 50 different ideas, one lines each for books, because we knew we had a sale. We just didn't know what the book was. They shot down every one of those 50 ideas for books. And I'm on the phone with Pam and I'm starting to get a bit angry. I said, "For God's sake, what do you want us to write? A book about movie love stories?" And she said, "Yes." So we wrote a book called called Love Stories, Hollywood's Most Beautiful Romances, or something like that. It was a picture book. Dan and I had 6 weeks to crank it out, and it came out in time for Valentine's Day, a few months earlier from Longmeadow Press. And they even put out a little tiny version of it called Isn't It Romantic? It was pictures and essays about our favorite movies. That may be the shortest pitch I've ever done for a book, and it worked. Then when Longmeadow went belly up several years later, I got the rights back. But that's how it happened. And from then, Pam got another job. You see what happens when you make friends with an editor and the editor knows you can deliver on deadline? She got a job with Adams Media Corporation. And they did their knockoff of the Idiots series, or for dummies. They did one called the Everything series. So she asked me would I like to write a book about etiquette. Now, I'm the sort of person who would eat soup with my hands, but she said, well, we'd like a book on etiquette. So I got a couple of old Emily Post books and I started just using my brain. And we did the Everything Etiquette book, which sold incredibly well. The trouble was it was a work for hire.
Mhm.
So they owned it. And it was in print for years and years. And I can literally tell people I wrote the book on good taste. After that, I did a book on trivia. And after that, I did a book on urban legends. And then I was supposed to do another one, but they decided they didn't want to do it anymore. So I went on to do other things. I
Yeah.
mean, you
So
get lucky, and you get an agent, and you just keep on throwing stuff at the wall like spaghetti. And when it sticks, you've got a job.
yeah, let's get into a little bit about you had worked a little bit on A&E's biography. How did that come about?
The company I was working for in North Hollywood, Weller Grossman Productions, got a contract from A&E to churn out 10 biographies. They got the contract because they had a list of all the people that A&E wanted to have biographies of. And it turned out that I knew John Belushi's widow, and they wanted a John Belushi biography. So we went into some tapes that had already been made. Judy Belushi, who's, as we tape this, this would have been her birthday today. I'm afraid she's passed. Had all of these recordings she had done. She interviewed John's friends after he died to try to preserve their memories while they were still fresh. And so, in a sense, I did a clip job using all of these previously recorded interviews with Chevy Chase and John Landis and Bill Murray and all the others, uh, and turned it into a biography, which ran in the first week of the revived biography series on A&E. And so, between that and another one that our company did, I think on Gene Roddenberry. We also did Gilda Radner at some point. I did Larry King. We, in a sense, set the template for the format for the A&E biography series. It went on for years and years. I was able to write and direct these things. Don't Tell the Writers Guild. And Rob Weller, who was one of the partners in the company, narrated it beautifully. And we turned out some really, really fine biographies. I did Stan Lee. I helped on doing the one for Darryl F. Zanuck, the official one for 20th Century Fox. Shari Lewis and Lamb Chop, which I later turned into a book with Shari's daughter. But you grind these things out, and they all have to come in at 43 minutes and 30 seconds. And if you're lucky, you don't have to do too many recuts. They were tougher to do in those days.
Yeah.
But again, it's the same way you do a written biography. You do a timeline, you find material to fill in, and you interview as many people as you can. And the trick is in those is to have the people tell the stories and not have the narrator tell them. Anything you can put on the backs of the people telling the stories makes it a more vivid biography.
Hmm. And so, where were you in your career at that point when you started working with A&E? Like, how many other, like, you had done the Billy book at that point? How many other books have you done when
No,
you
no.
started doing those biography?
I really
And I
don't
know,
know.
I know, we're going over a lot of different
Well,
stuff. If you don't
no,
know
I feel
that,
like
that's fine. I'm just trying
no.
to pinpoint us down kind of in a timeline of your career of like, when things came about.
When you haven't got a regular job, I haven't had a regular job for 50 years. It drives my accountant crazy. But when you're freelancing, you take whatever the work is, as long as it doesn't involve children, small animals, or Scientology. And I was able to keep going by writing articles, but I had moved out to California in the meantime. So that by the 1990s, I was out where I am now, churning out television and writing books on the side if I could. But I gave up books for a while because I just was too busy doing television. I was also involved ghostwriting speeches for fundraisers and things like that. You take the job when you can. But I didn't lose sight of the fact that I was meeting people and trying to get projects going as much as possible. I worked for a while with something called the Africa Channel, which was being done at Wilder Grossman Productions. Some investors had licensed programs from Africa, and they put them on cable here to meet an audience that they thought had interest in the African continent and the cultures there. You do what you can.
Yeah. So what can you tell us about when Wells Collide, which I understand is your
Oh God.
sequel to Invasion from Mars? Which for people who don't realize, I mean, again, kids these days don't really, they can't appreciate how TV, like not everybody owned a TV. If you wanted entertainment, either you had to read or you had to listen to the radio, and there'd be radio plays. And of course, Orson Welles got very famous because he had done this radio. Basically, people literally believed that we were being invaded by Mars.
Yes.
And I, like a few people even like died from that, if I remember correctly. Is that
I don't
accurate,
think
or is that
died.
kind of not really
I
100%
think that
correct?
that's probably apocryphal. But for
Okay.
Halloween 1938, for the Mercury Theater of the Air, Orson Welles directed writer Howard Koch, who later was one of the writers on Casablanca, so he was no fool, to take H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds and turn it into a series of news broadcasts, which they did live on CBS and scared the bejesus out of America. It was recorded not very well, but it was turning up on records and tapes for decades after that. Illegally, by the way, because the tapes were still owned by CBS and Howard Koch had the rights to the script. But we decided at one point, because I had, sidebar, worked with a great actor named John Delancey, who is probably best known for playing Q on Star Trek The Next Generation, with LA Theater Works, which was a live uh, play reading organization out here. Dan Kimmel, Arnie Reisman, and I had written a play called The Waldorf Conference about the origins of the Hollywood blacklist. That was godfathered by Ed Asner, who brought it to Susan Lowenberg of LA Theater Works, and we did it live on NPR. It got enormous popularity, great ratings, but we all decided we would keep on doing it. And John called me a little later and said, would you consider doing a new version of War of the Worlds starring Leonard Nimoy in the Orson Welles role, doing with an all Star Trek cast? It was the biggest Star Trek convention that wasn't a Star Trek convention. But the play is only an hour long, so we decided to write a sequel to it. Well, naturally, John called up Howard Koch, who with his wife was living in Woodstock, New York, and said, could you write a sequel? Howard was on in years, and he said, well, the sequel would be we go to Mars after the Martians and try to get even. And after delay, it was clear that Howard wasn't able to deliver the script. So John asked me if I would write one with him. And so I have the distinction or the curse of writing after Howard Koch, the man who wrote Casablanca. But we did it, and we called it When Wells Collide. And the idea behind it, and this was all done live on NPR, was that after the War of the Worlds broadcast, the actors become themselves again, and they play themselves in the 20-minute sequel. They're all congratulating each other in the green room, and they're saying how great it went. And then reports come in that Martians have landed in Santa Monica, and they have gone under Santa Monica Bay, and eventually it turns into the end of the world. But you see, nobody believes it because this was the era when OJ was having his trial and all the fake news was coming out and everybody was going into exploitation. And so our aim was in 1938, the Martians didn't land and everybody believed it. But in 1993, the Martians did land and nobody believed it. And we had a lot of fun with it. But it's never been rebroadcast for reasons I'll never understand. I have the only digital copy. And if anybody wants to make a deal, I'll be happy to talk about it. But it was the War of the Worlds, and it was When Worlds Collide for LA Theater Works, and it was a sensation. And could you imagine hanging around with all those Star Trek people who didn't have to play Star Trek people? They got to play other roles. It was a real privilege to be with them all. It was a lot of fun. And Leonard and John and I, after that, formed a company called Alien Voices, where we did audiobook versions of classic science fiction stories with Star Trek casts. And John and I scripted all of them. And it was an absolute joy and a ball. And those things are still online if they're not being pirated all over the place.
Yeah, so I see here too, you had a teleplay called The First Men in the Moon, which was the first ever TV internet simulcast,
Mhm.
and was on the Sci-Fi Channel. Can you tell us what that was about?
Well, it was, of course, the H.G. Wells story about the first men in the moon. We later did it as an audiobook too. But the Sci-Fi Channel, through Leonard's amazing diplomacy, gave us a contract to do a 1 hour show, which we did at the Variety Arts Theater in Los Angeles. And it's about two guys who go to the moon using cavorite, which is an anti-gravity substance. And they meet the leader of the moon, who was played by William Shatner. And it was the biggest non-kept secret in Los Angeles that Bill Shatner was going to play the king of the Selenites, who were the people on the moon, as he meets John Delancey and Leonard Nimoy. So it was a great watching Leonard and Bill work with each other. And it just they kept each other in check. Let's put it that way. But it was a beautiful production. It was done live with all the sound effects, the Foley done live in front of a packed audience of all kinds of people, some invited, some were sort of nosed their way in, fans and people in the industry. It was a real in-group, sort of like going to the Emmys. And the production went off without a hitch, live. And in those days, nobody had done streaming live before on the internet, but the Science Fiction Channel was able to do it. And it was a real joy to be there. And I was the writer. I was the credited writer. And it was wonderful to actually have them ask me questions now and then and not keep me off in the kids' room. It was a great
And
production
so
all
that was
around.
adapting. Had you done anything prior that was more like an original work of fiction? I mean, you had done obviously a lot of biographies and nonfiction and just reporting,
Mhm.
but was there ever a sense where you wanted to do something more? I hate to use I don't use the word creative, but I mean something more that was just like complete fiction that where it was just
Sure.
straight from your mind, either as a story, novel, or even as a screenplay, because you had obviously worked in
Mhm.
Hollywood and film.
I'd written screenplays before on my own and never really gotten anywhere. I'd optioned one or two and nothing ever happened with them. It's sort of clear to me that my métier is either adapting or writing nonfiction. Although us, the two producers have a screenplay now of mine that I can't talk about purely out of superstition, that they're taking around to Netflix and the other places to see what we can do with it. We think it has a chance. That's the first fiction I've had that's really gone anywhere. But, you know, maybe we'll get back in touch if anything happens. I'm
Yeah,
I'm a
absolutely.
nonfiction kind of guy.
Yeah, no, fingers crossed. Well, then, what can you tell us about the Waldorf conference?
Well, that was a privilege to be involved with. Dan Kimmel, Arnie Reisman, and I, who were all kind of blacklist scholars anyway, in 1991 decided we'd get together and write a play about the origins of the blacklist. On November 24th and 25th, 1947, at New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel, the heads of all the film companies got together. There were 48 of them. They had a secret meeting, and their job was to determine how Hollywood was going to react to the recent hearings in October in Washington of the House Un-American Activities Committee, in which 10 men, writers, directors, and producers, were called the Unfriendly Ten because they refused to answer questions about whether they had been in the Communist Party. The moguls were scared because it wasn't just the government was cracking down on communists or alleged communists. There were countries who were refusing to screen American films if their communists were involved. Wall Street was saying you better do something because the movies are losing money. Television was just coming in, and it was really a signal for the end of the film industry if these moguls didn't do something. They argued back and forth for 2 days, and by the end of it, they wrote something called the Waldorf Peace Pact, which was the blacklist. And you're watching people come. We're having construction done in the area, and this
That's
is
okay.
my friend, and here's Louis. So we're talking about the blacklist, and here's this. Well, Arnie and Dan and I wrote a script, which Ed Asner and Ron Rifkin and John Randolph, who've been blacklisted, Shelley Berman, Charlie Durning, Bill Macy. I mean, we had 10, 12 of the most amazing actors reading this, doing performances in front of microphones, in front of a live audience, and in recording for broadcast later. Um, It was just an astonishing time, and we had a lot of interest from people after this, including a couple of producers who were able to take it to Warner Brothers, and we got a deal to write the teleplay because they were trying to sell it. Warner Brothers couldn't sell it; they still own it. So if anybody wants to make the Waldorf conference, I'll be happy to talk with them about it. But it was a comedy about the beginnings of the blacklist. And what's interesting is we have some of the greatest comic actors there. I mean, Asner, Durning, John Randolph, Bill Macy, Shelley Berman. They didn't know it was a comedy until the audience started laughing. And then when the audience started laughing, these guys milked the gags more than a whole dairy industry. And we ran overtime the first night because they didn't know it was so funny. That's how great they were at getting it up on its feet. So we had a marvelous time doing the Waldorf conference, which also was very biting because at the end, of course, you realize these people's careers were doomed. And we took the audience on that whole journey. And interestingly, afterwards, we did it in Santa Monica. And a number of people came up afterwards and said, we're part of the family, which means they or their kin were blacklisted. And they found a great affinity with what we'd done in trying to expose the origins of what had killed their careers.
Yeah. What about Harlan Ellison? You had written a book about Harlan Ellison. How did you end up meeting Harlan Ellison? Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with him?
I had met Harlan by accident when I was reviewing a movie called Communion, the Whitley Strieber's just insane film about meeting aliens. Christopher Walken was in it to show you how insane it was. I'm in a screening of it, and some guy behind me is talking. I turned around like to be quiet, and I said, "Oh, you're Harlan Ellison." He says, "Yes, I am." That passed. Years later, I was interviewing Harlan for my A&E biography of Stan Lee. Went to Harlan's house. I can't really tell you the full details because they're vulgar, but as we were setting up our cameras, Harlan made a joke that was so vulgar that it literally peeled the wallpaper off. And I said, "Oh, that's great, Harlan. We've been talking for 30 seconds and already you're telling us a dirty joke." Well, Harlan doesn't like being attacked, but he knew he should have been attacked. And he smiled and said, "Let's do the interview." And we had a great time. We were friends for years. And finally, in about 2016 or 17, he asked me if I would like to write his biography. He read my biography of Stirling Silliphant, read my biography of Arthur Penn, and said he'd like me to write his, which was quite a compliment. He didn't ask anybody else. And so I was able to get a contract to do it. But the publisher was very concerned because Harlan, as we know, was famously litigious. So I had Harlan give me a letter of authorization to quote from his works. And to date, I think I'm the only writer who's ever been given carte blanche to quote from Harlan's works. The book came out. It was called A Lit Fuse, The Provocative Life of Harlan Ellison. And it was done by NESFA Press, New England Science Fiction Association. Sold extremely well. And I was nominated for a couple of awards, which, of course, I never win awards, so I didn't. But I'm so proud to have been in that great company of science fiction writers, and especially Harlan, who was a speculative fiction writer, to have become a close, very close friend. So that when he passed, it was, and then his wife shortly afterwards, it was just devastating, and we haven't gotten over it. But it was a privilege.
Yeah. What about Guarding Gable? What can you talk about that?
That's something I'm not talking a great deal about. It started off as a screenplay that I had written about Clark Gable in World War II. And when I wasn't getting a lot of traction for the screenplay, I decided I would novelize it. So I novelized it. Bear Matter Media was very kind in letting me do it, and I wrote it as a novel. The idea being the mouth breathers out here are afraid to look at 120 pages of typing on a script. But if somebody else has taken a chance and turned something into a book, then they'll take a chance on it. So that's the one I mentioned earlier. We're trying to get that done as a movie. It was optioned immediately by a couple of producers, and we're taking it around now. But it's interesting that people didn't want the screenplay because there's screenplays up the wazoo out here. But a book, a publisher's taking a chance, and the book is also selling. I'm happy to report. But that's what I'm hoping will take place. Clark Gable in World War II.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to be an ongoing trend, especially last couple of years, where short stories are the things that agents and managers try to shop around. Not not necessarily even novels or even a script. In fact, I even heard one writer basically being told they should take their script and adapt it into a short story because it would be easier to try to sell the short story than to sell the script.
Well, yeah, well,
It's pretty crazy.
yeah.
That's because I guess, in the end, they really just want something short. They really want kind of just, I guess, the IP to see what the log line is or whatever else. But it's just kind of crazy how, and the same thing happens in publishing. I mean, again, like no one really knows anything. It's very much just a free for all. But it's just, yeah, it's very interesting, like you said, where, oh, they would rather look at something because it's a book than a script. And yeah.
Yeah, you talk about elevator pitches. If you're in the elevator for 30 seconds with somebody, you've got to summarize your film in 30 seconds because they can't get out because the doors are closed. But this, goes back to 1969 and 70 when Paramount, Bob Evans acquired Eric Siegel's screenplay for Love Story. He had Siegel novelize it into a book that you could read while timing a 3-minute egg. The book became a bestseller, and that fueled the making of the movie. But what a lot of people didn't know at the time was Paramount got a hold of a list of the bookstores in New York City that the New York Times sampled for their bestseller list. And on a particular day at a particular time, they had all the secretaries from Paramount on Broadway go into Brentano's and all the other bookstores and buy Love Story, which of course immediately placed it on the New York Times bestseller list. And it took off. So they had literally contrived a bestseller. They did the same thing with The Godfather. Over at Warner Brothers, they did it with Summer of 42. All the secretaries went out one day after they finished lunch and they bought Summer of 42. I was asked to do it at Paramount for Dennis, forgot his last name, Report from Engine Company 52, which they wound up not making as a film. For a period of a couple of years there, you could actually engineer a bestseller until the New York Times stopped it by keeping their sampled stores secret. But that's,
Yeah, the
how the
stores are
old days.
secret, but not so much because usually you have to see when these major authors go on tour, the bookstores that they stop at. I mean,
Yeah.
it's still kind of out there what stores they typically are. But no, it is true, and there have been a lot of authors who have tried to game the system to try to make sure they buy in bulk at certain stores to get on a list. Because yeah, you realize after a while, like bestseller list, it sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that the book sold well. It just meant that they got lucky on that particular week or whatever else. But
Well,
all right,
but you're a best-selling author. Your books sell because they're good. I mean, how do you explain that?
luck, luck, luck and time. I mean, honestly, the two times that I hit, and this was on the USA Today list back when they actually counted like how many like it was based on the volume of sales. And at the
Uh-huh.
time, it was more like just I had like an ebook promotions on that week, so sold like several thousand in a week. But then there were other weeks where I had other books that sold probably just as much and never hit the USA Today list. Now the USA Today list is very much like the New York Times list, where it's certain bookstores will
Uh-huh.
report, on however many copies they sold that week, and so it's not really based kind of on the volume of sales then. But well, let's talk about let's get into the Rambo book. How did that one come about with David Morrell?
I'd known David because we had met at least on the phone and in email when I was writing the biography of Stirling Silliphant, because of course Stirling was the mentor to David when David expressed his love of Route 66, and they worked on The Brotherhood of the Rose after that as a television miniseries. So they were very, very close, and they saw each other. David went to Thailand, where Stirling was then living. I had become the franchise guy at Kensington Citadel Publishers, having done The Exorcist Legacy, which sold very well for them, the book on Scarface, A Century of Scarface, that didn't sell so well for them. They wanted another book, and it occurred to me that, well, you got a great franchise and a great in for the franchise in Rambo. So I simply asked David, and David readily agreed. And I'd like to say we worked together closely. David is not only a great writer, but a marvelous teacher. And needless to say, a good friend, as you well know. So I wrote about Rambo, and I started delving into Rambo in every way, shape, and form, talking with anybody who knew anything about Rambo's production who was still alive. Now, regrettably, there aren't too many of those people. It was a joy to write the book because I knew that I could run everything past David and he would tell me if it was malarkey or accurate. I did come across a couple of things that he says he didn't know about, some figures and some little deals now and then, nothing really inopportune. That just the book almost wrote itself. But the reason I wanted to write it was not just to write a book. It was because if you take Rambo, the whole franchise, if you will, you're really talking about America's involvement in other countries for the last 50 years. And it was interesting to me how America had created Rambo, this kid, in David's book in 1972, who really came to represent everybody who'd been sent to war without being told why, and they came home and nobody said thank you. And to know that Rambo really was suffering from PTSD, which was not really diagnosed, a tragic character who was terribly, terribly damaged by war and yet was forced to be a hero to the point where the only time that Rambo feels comfortable is in a combat situation. That's a terrible thing to say about anybody and what a country can do to him, no matter how good the cause might have been. And so in tracing Rambo through the various adventures he had, both in Hope, in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, in Burma, and then in Mexico, you really see how America has changed over the decades and how our involvement with other countries and other cultures has shaped America. And the people who watch Rambo, I think, are part of that whole responsibility. It was
Yeah.
a political book as well as a social book and a movie book.
And it's fascinating just in terms of Rambo because for anybody who has read First Blood, and I don't really know if this is much of a spoiler alert because the book's been out for decades, Rambo dies.
Yeah.
And clearly, you cannot have a franchise character if your main character dies. So, and I think and I forget if I had discussed this with David when I chatted with him, and when that book comes, I mean, when that book comes out, sometimes authors have more of a say than other authors over, like, and that part of, I guess that kind of comes part of like the deal, like when they create the deal with the studio or producer or whatever else. Like sometimes authors will get like John Grisham famously had the say on who would star in A Time to Kill because
Mm.
initially it was supposed to be Woody Harrelson was supposed to have the big part, but Woody Harrelson had just been in Natural Born Killers, and that there was a whole other thing because of what that was based on, and John Grisham basically was like no, and then that's how Matthew McConaughey got in, and he becomes a huge star because of that. That really helped launch his career. Did David Morrell really have any say on the fact is we're going to take this book and we're going to make it a movie, but you know how in the end you kill off your main character? We're going to keep him alive.
No, nobody could write a Rambo book but David. That is well, besides morally, legally too. He's the one who has the character and he's the one who can write books about him. And of course, First Blood was the Rambo book. He novelized the screenplays for Rambo 2 and 3 brilliantly because he added so much other information and created characters. And in fact, for one of them, even used a James Cameron script that had been written and he was able to use that material. So the other two Rambo books are wonderful books, but they're not part of the original doctrine, if you will. They didn't know they were going to make a sequel to Rambo. It wasn't a franchise. They didn't even use the word franchise in those days.
Mm.
They called them sequels. The reaction to it was so great that they decided, Mario Kassar and Andy Viner, the producers, decided to go ahead. But in fact, Rambo does die at the end. And if you look at the special features on some of the DVDs and Blu-rays, you'll see the footage about Rambo not dying. But of course, in the book, forget spoilers. Colonel Troutman shoots Rambo and Rambo dies. That's the end of the story. Well, in the movie, the way they had shot it, it was done so that Troutman pulls a pistol on Rambo, and Stallone grabs the pistol in a way that you're not really sure whether Troutman, Richard Crenna fires, or Stallone fires on himself, and he dies. This is after he has his breakdown. But Ted Kotcheff and Sylvester Stallone decided when they were in Canada shooting it, and a lot of people have different stories about this, but the only one that makes sense is they did it while they were shooting the real movie. They decided they would do a version of it where Rambo lived. And there were different reasons for it, not because they wanted a franchise, but because, and this is something I gotta hand it to Stallone for. He said, I don't want veterans seeing this movie to think that the only way out of their pain is to die.
Mm.
I want them to know they can live. Well,
Hmm.
that's what happened. And a lot of veterans see the movies as a way of of reclaiming their identity, and a lot of people have come to it by seeing Rambo as a hero, flawed and in pain as he is, but a hero who helps other people solve problems. The battles he gets into are not for himself, although they do cleanse his soul. He's always going to help somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is fascinating. So, and did I read recently, I forget if it was in Deadline or Hollywood Reporter, that they're going to be doing a prequel now to Rambo?
There's been talk for 20 years. I hope it works out because I think the public wants to see it, but I don't know. You can,
Yeah. Okay.
everything's a rumor out here.
It's true. And then even when things are greenlit, doesn't necessarily mean it's even going to come out. So that's a whole
Yeah.
other conversation. Let's talk about Louis a little bit.
Still
Obviously you have
there?
a little dog
He's
there.
he's sleeping it off. He's sleeping
Yeah,
it off.
you said
Yeah,
that
Louis is
that
my
you're his
13-year-old.
fourth, that like you're his fourth owner. He's what you said, 13 years old, and
Yeah.
he's written a book. What can you tell us
Yes,
about
he's
that?
written. I'm going to hold this up because I'm shameless. It's called Dog's Diary. And oh, this is the version that has a matte cover. Very good. It starts off when we were all on lockdown for COVID out here in Los Angeles. It's one of those nice animal books where the animal actually lives at the end. So it's not a downer. I self-published it because no publisher had the guts to go along with it. Although Louis and I did record the audiobook version, which is on Bear Manor Audio, and they have I think they have the PDF version. If you do self-publishing and you put color in there, it's so expensive that you got to sell the book for $20. And who's going to buy a pamphlet for $20? But it's funny. We had to get used to each other. Yes, I'm indulgent of the animal. He leads me around, but I tell you that we got together during COVID, and I if it hadn't been for Louis during COVID, I probably would have French kissed a light socket because he was my only contact. So I'm sitting here typing all the time. He was a bit more active then, but that's it. Everybody has a dog that he or she loves. This is mine. I'm not going to say we're special. I'm just going to say that I wrote the book with Louis.
And so specifically, I mean, like, what's the book? I mean, what's the elevator pitch about Dog's Diary?
It's a journal about how two people who've lived alone, I mean, he's a person to me, how I actually got used to him because I never had a dog before, even as a kid, and how Louis got used to me because I'm pretty weird too. I mean, half of the day I'm here, we're together, but I'm typing and he's writing. I don't leave him alone. And so we had to go over each other's peccadillos. I had to learn how to walk him. He has a tendency to go out at 2 or 3 in the morning, Louis, to be walked, and I indulge him in that. I mean, it's everything the dog owners have gone through without any tragedy, but it's just the little stuff that can get under your skin or under his fur, and I think that's what it's about. I really haven't talked a whole lot about the book. Writing it was enough fun, and I'm just hoping that it serves as a kind of a I don't know a souvenir for anybody who might have had it. It's on Amazon, and that's all I really know.
Great. All right. So you
Oh,
have
I'm
so many
sorry,
other books. Yeah, go
and
ahead.
all profits go to animal charities, by the way. But
Oh,
anyway,
okay. That's very nice. All right. So you have so many more books, and we're limited on time, but I do want to highlight a little bit about the naughty bits, what the censors wouldn't let you see in Hollywood's most famous movies. Um, uh, what can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I don't know, there was a documentary. Oh God, I forget how long it was about. It was, I know if I remember correctly, what was the title of the documentary? But basically, it talked about is it the MPAA or whatever,
yeah,
like how they
yeah,
rate movies and how it's one of those where it was like it kind of exposed kind of the joke of this whole rating system and where it's like, basically it doesn't really mean anything, or it's kind of like just these people who kind of have a little bit too much power and say, oh, well, we're going to say this is R or X or PG-13 or whatever else. And I know that's probably not necessarily what the book is about, but like, can we kind of talk about both? We're just like, this
yes.
idea where, and especially how that changed now. I mean, now with streaming, like things don't even get
Yeah.
rated anymore.
That's true. The movie I think you're thinking of is called This Film Has Not Yet Been Rated, and it's by a
Yes, that's the
documentary
one.
director named Kirby Dick, who wanted to find out who the hell rates the movies. And he actually used detective devices to find out who these people are. And are they average people? Are they intelligent people? Are they psychiatrists or what? For the Classification and Rating Administration, CARA, which is a division of the Motion Picture Association. which used to be the Motion Picture Association of America when Jack Valenti was running it. But now Charles Roven is running it, and it's called the MPA because they're no longer just America, which shows the multinational nature of the Hollywood business. Back in the 1920s, a number of scandals, overdoses, sex scandals, murders rocked Hollywood, and there was a national call for censorship. The motion picture companies, who by and large were run by Jews, decided that there was going to be a wave of anti-Semitism against Hollywood. So they hired a Christian named Will Hayes, who looked like he fell off a turnip truck, to head the Motion Picture Association, which was then called Motion Picture Distributors of America. Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America. And with the help of the people who ran the Hollywood Reporter, they created something called the Motion Picture Production Code of Self-Censorship in 1929, what you could and couldn't do on screen. And the purpose of that was twofold. One, to stop anti-Semitism, and two, more importantly, to prevent the creation of local censorship boards who would cut the movies various ways, and it was impossible to make a version that was suitable for every community in America. Under the Hayes office, they would look at scripts, they would look at films, and decide what was going to get you in trouble and what wouldn't. The problem is nobody enforced it for 5 years, not until March of 1934, when the new sheriff in town, named Joseph Ignatius Breen, was put in charge of the production code. Did films need a code seal that permitted them to be shown? And the Breen office looked at books and plays and short stories and magazine articles and every version of a screenplay, and they wrote letters saying, you'd have to change this. You'd have to change this. This is acceptable. This is not acceptable. They even looked at the final film and the costumes and the advertising slogans and the posters and the ads in newspapers that were used to make sure that nothing portrayed people in a bad light.
Yeah.
I was given access by the Motion Picture Academy to hundreds of these letters and films and screens to write the naughty bits. Plus, the Motion Picture Association was very kind in letting me quote from them, although I'm not supposed to say that. And I wrote the naughty bits where we would take some of the most famous films ever made, and not just Gone with the Wind and Casablanca, but I mean some of the other ones, and write. I wrote about the making of the film, what the film was about, of course, and then what the trouble was getting them released. And I even write about The Sound of Music and the Ten Commandments to show one end of it. And the other one's Convention City, which was a movie that was so scurrilous that Jack Warner ordered all copies destroyed. And to this day, the film doesn't exist. Convention City was about a bunch of guys going to a convention, and you can imagine what happened. Everything in between. It deals a lot with lesbianism, homosexuality, in drinking, in a lack of respect for politicians and the police. Gosh, that's new. And everything you could possibly think could and couldn't be done. Women sleeping their way to the top, men committing adultery. All of these things were cut out of movies. Some of them have been restored, but not many. They just vanished forever. And The Naughty Bitch is about each of these 53 films, 53 examples of what happened before they were allowed to be released. It's very funny. And the one thing I discovered in the course of it, everybody makes fun of the censors. But when you look at the workload these people had to read everything and go over everything, and in some cases, one incredible case, Green wrote to Leo McCarey, who'd made a film called Love Affair, Charles Boyer and Irene Dunn, which involves couples who aren't married who get together. And his letter goes, in a sense, this is one of the finest screenplays I've ever read, but we can't let you produce it. So these people on the censorship board were not prigs. They were actually quite intelligent and very good workers who sometimes had their own beliefs confronted by the movies and the rules they were forced to enforce. They did make Love Affair. It's still one of the great films. It's public domain and available on YouTube, but changes had to be made. Well, this is what The Naughty Bitch is about. It's about how Hollywood compromised itself and how it led to the 1968 creation of the motion picture rating system that Jack Valenti created, which was far more liberal and I think has taken a lot of the pressure off. And when you think about it, the letter rating system has been around longer than the original production code. It has survived, so it was quite a good job.
Yeah. Which Spielberg movie was the one that created the PG-13? Was it one of the Indiana Jones movie?
Yes, I think it was the first one.
The,
No,
the
I'm
first
sorry,
one.
the second one.
That was Temple of
Indiana
Doom.
Jones.
That's right.
Yeah, the
Temple
second
of
one,
Doom.
which was a bit more violent.
Yeah,
But
it's very
Jaws
dark.
and others were said suggested for mature audiences. It changes over the years with the budget of the film.
Yeah. So, and then just real quick as an aside, I don't know if you ever watched 30 Rock, but my favorite censorship bit is when Kenneth Page becomes he works in the censorship office and he's basically like, we can't do this. You can't say Dick Wolf on TV. And it was just always kind of funny. The movie, for whatever reason, I just was reminded as you were discussing the 1945 movie Detour. I don't know if you ever saw it, but
Oh,
it was one of
sure,
those
sure.
interesting things
Edgar Ulmer, right?
where they had to actually add something because apparently, I guess at that point, killers, like, bad people cannot get away with their crimes. So at the
Right.
very end, literally the last like 10 seconds, he's walking along and there's a car, these cops show up and just, grab him and throw him in the car, and that's how it ends. Just
Yeah,
because he could not get away with his
he couldn't.
crimes.
Well, the Thomas Crown Affair, the Norma Jewison version with Steve McQueen, he gets away with it. That had never been done before. In Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, there's a face shot as Bonnie and Clyde are pulling away from having robbed a bank. One of the bank tellers jumps on the running board of their jalopy, and Warren Beatty pulls out a gun and shoots him right in the face on camera, full frame. It had been that if you shoot somebody, you shoot the guy with a gun in one shot, and you show the guy getting hit in the other, and there's no blood. The actor was Russ Saunders, a stuntman and assistant director, took it right in the face. That had never been done before, and there were conniptions in the production code offices, but that was the transition between the old code and the new code, and they let it go.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know at what point. I don't know. I'm assuming we've all become very numb to it. I was watching, there was this Polish spy thriller that HBO Max has, the Eastern Gate, which is really well done. But I don't know if it's just because special effects are so much better, but literally you see a character hold a gun to someone's head, shoot them, you see, you know what I mean? Like it's no longer where you see the gun and then they cut away or it's,
Oh,
I think it's like you are
it's
seeing,
explosive.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean, they
yeah.
really, yeah. So, wow.
In
All right.
Peter
Well,
Yates' film Bullet, I mean, the point of it is it's silly because you can have an R-rated or an NC-17 rating in a theater, and then when it comes home, your 5-year-old can watch it.
oh, there was always, like red band trailers were always a big thing. Or when they released the
Yeah,
DVDs, it was always the uncut, which might have an extra, like, 30 seconds of something that they didn't have in there.
yeah.
But it was a great marketing ploy. It was that thing where it's like, oh, I want the uncut or the unrated version. Yeah, we could keep talking about this, but I don't
We're
want to keep
really
much more of
going
your
on
time.
here.
So
No.
let's talk about, we talked about the Billy Friedkin book that you now have re-released. Is that correct? That was your very
Yes,
first book that's now out. What can you tell us about the re-release? Is there anything new about the re-release, or is it the same old book, just new look?
I added a foreword telling what happened to the original version, and I had a very long afterword with the assistance of Sherry Lansing, who used to head Paramount Pictures, but also was Billy's widow. Oh, that's a strange use of that word, talking about Billy's passing and about his legacy. And I talked to a few other people, but it's a biography of William Friedkin himself, not a book about his films. There is a wonderful book about his films by Thomas Claggett called William Friedkin, Films of Aberration and so forth. That's also available. And Tom goes into all the details of all the films. But I just wanted to get the book out again after 35 years. So people who've been bugging me for copies, I've got a few left under my bed, but I think this will be a way to get it to people who really wanted to read it.
Yeah. And then do you have anything in the pipeline that's going to be coming out either later this year or next year?
I've just sold a book to the University Press of Kentucky, who have a marvelous, marvelous film section. This is called The Secret Hitchcock, and it's about how Hitchcock used Cary Grant and James Stewart to do to the women in his films what he himself couldn't do. And that's my elevator pitch on a very, very short ride.
Okay.
That's coming out in October. And I've
Wow.
written
Okay.
another one,
So in
which
October. Wow. All right. Wow. Uh, and then I always like to ask, is there anything that you've read, watched, listened that you enjoyed and would recommend?
there's a couple of books. Thank you for asking. I don't have them in front of me right now. One of them is by a colleague named Daniel Kramer, Kremer, who's written a book called Adventures in Auteurism, which is a very thick book. And Daniel likes the runt of the litter, so to speak. He is the biographer of Sidney Furie, of Joan Micklin Silver. He's just finished a book on Henry Jaglom, and he has written about films that you may not have heard of, but he's taking auteurs to task and at the same time going off in their direction. It's a very thick book called Adventures in Auteurism. It's going to make a lot of people very angry because of the opinions that he has, but he's a fine writer and a wonderful theorist. It's available from Sticking Place Books.
Okay.
Another one that I'm very enamored of is coming out by Kirk Ellis, whom you probably know. It's called They Kill People, and it's an exhaustive story of Bonnie and Clyde. It's coming out from High Road Books next month. I'm fortunate to have had something to do with it because I, of course, did Arthur Penn's biography. Kirk is a friend, and this book is just everything you want to know, not only about Bonnie and Clyde, but about the people, the movie, the gun culture in America, history, Hollywood, censorship, and everything. It is just a beautifully written, almost poetic book, which has a lot of great stuff in it. So that's They Kill People, and other stuff I'd have to list it, but there's some good things coming out now.
Good. Good, good, good. All right. Well, Nat, thank you so much for making time. I don't want to keep much more of your time. I know that, you have construction going on. You're very busy. I'm sure Louis needs to go out and sniff
Louis has to
around.
go out. Yeah.
Did
So do I
you,
at this
if
point.
people want to find you online though, where's the best way they can do that?
Well, I have a website, www.natsegaloff.com. You can Google me. I'm all over the place. I'm on Facebook, and that's where some of the weird stuff is, but I'm not on any other social media because I don't understand it. But my website is natsegaloff.com, or just Google me. I mean, you're going to find something out there. I'm on YouTube. You know how it is. You sort of get around. I communicate with people almost entirely by rumor.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for making time to chat. I know this has been, we had discussed this months and months and months ago. We were finally able to make it happen. So I'm happy that we were finally able to connect. And yeah, congratulations on all the books you have. I'm looking forward. There's the Shakespeare one sounds, or not Shakespeare, God, Hitchcock. I don't know what I'm thinking. Hitchcock.
Same thing.
I'm sure
Same
you'll write
thing.
I'm sure you'll write a Shakespeare book at some point. So,
Well,
but
eventually, right? Robert,
yeah.
thank you
So,
so much. It's been a privilege and an honor talking with you, considering the other people you've had on this website. I'm like below the bottom of people's shoes
no, no,
compared to
no,
all
no,
these other
no, no.
people. And I
Do
thank you
not
so
say that at
much.
all. No, it was a pleasure. So again, thank you, and we will see everybody next time. Bye.